I think I'm going to get started. It's noon. I see people are still joining, so I'll just start out with a brief introduction and some housekeeping things, and then we'll just jump into the nuts and bolts of the webinar today. So first, I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today for this update on the NRCS Interim Organic Management Standard 823. I am Roz Lehman. I'm the Executive Director for the Iowa Organic Association. And as I mentioned, I'm going to share some housekeeping things. So this is a webinar today. So we'll take your questions and comments either through the Q&A or through the chat. Kathleen asks if the Q&A is working. It looks like it's working. So hopefully we should be good there. So yes, definitely be sure to share your questions and comments, your experiences, if you've been interacting with the NRCS at all with this particular standard. I know there's questions coming up and I know folks need some clarification on some things. So please feel free to interact that way. There is an option to be able to allow you to speak. So that might be an option as well. You want to delve into further discussion on a particular question. Maybe it's just easier to have you jump on. So again, we do realize this is a very new standard and process, especially for the staff in the county offices who aren't typically working with organic farmers. So your thoughts and comments and feedback, both the NRCS staff that are on today, as well as farmers and those that are interacting with the offices, please definitely share your experiences and what's going on out there. Last thing is I will be sending out a short survey after the webinar. And so if you don't want to share your thoughts and comments here in this live forum, please, that's an opportunity that you can share or share your questions further. So I am going to share my screen. Okay, so I just wanted to give you just a little bit of background about the Iowa Organic Association for some of you that are maybe new and haven't heard about us. We are a nonprofit organization that was established in 2006. We have a statewide presence, and our members are a diverse community of farmers, gardeners, food farm businesses, advocates, and community consumers who champion organic practices and products. So our mission is to advance organic agriculture and food systems in Iowa. And we look at values such as ecosystem integrity, community and collaboration, and economic vitality on the farm. So what the types of priorities our organization focuses on is education and training. So we will do webinars, field days. We've done some technical workshops around the state, and we have some additional resources that we provide online and in print when we are doing our outreach. We're available to provide technical advice and support, as well as resources that we have collected over the years. We conduct outreach, so we are out in the public interacting about organic resources. Additionally, we provide information through our social media channels, e-news. So we're trying to direct mail. We just have a variety of ways that we connect with Iowa's organic community. We also like to we communicate with our policy leaders about organic and the benefits of organic and ways our policy leaders can support our organic community. And then, of course, growing the organic community in Iowa to provide support to each other and just really help grow this overall movement in the state. And so one of the reasons we're here today, the USDA just last fall initiated the Organic Transition Initiative, which is a $300 million investment in expanding organic transition acres and certified operations across the United States. The reason we're here today is to talk about the Organic Management Standard, which is a portion of, is a piece of the Organic Transition Initiative. And additionally, it is also funding is part of through the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm going to let Kevin and Jessica talk more in detail about that specific piece. There's this big overall program and there's a lot of pieces underneath of it. And I want you to be aware of some additional things that are taking place. Nationally, the Organic Transition Initiative, through the top portion of it, which is Transition Organic Partnership Program, will be rolling out a farmer to farmer mentoring program. So it's a great opportunity for folks that are looking to have some additional technical assistance through a seasoned farmer expert. We are looking for opportunities to connect those beginning, new, transitioning farmers with that mentoring opportunity. So please let us know if you or someone you might know is interested in getting involved with that. Additionally, we'll be providing greater technical service or technical assistance and advice throughout within the state. So you could expect to see us being able to offer that support late summer, fall, by the end of 2023. And then the overall, the purpose of this initiative is also to expand community. So it fits really nicely into the work that Iowa Organic is doing, but really growing this community to provide support, resources. And it's just nice to have a neighbor in the area that's doing some of the same things that you are as well. So really expanding that network. That's just a brief overview. There is more to come about Organic Transition Initiative and talk, but I really want us to be able to spend the majority of our time today talking about the OMS 823. So please let me know if you have questions and comments about the other things I mentioned. I'm happy to follow up at the end or offline. Let's see. Sound is bad. Okay, it looks like I might need to be mute some people. Sorry guys for the extra sound. I show that the chat is working, so I'm seeing all of your comments, so I'm not exactly sure. I have a couple people that says it seems like the chat isn't working, but I want to tell you I'm seeing what you're chatting about, so maybe throw something in the comments too if you're not sure you're getting through. And then, yes, I'm happy to make the slides available at the after the webinar. So what I'll be doing is I'll be sending out a link to this particular webinar, so you'll be able to view that through our webinar or our YouTube channel. Then I can provide links to the actual slides, and then there'll also be a link to do a really short survey about today's webinar, just to provide a little bit of feedback on about today. So one more thing on the chat. Yes, as Jessica said, if you're able to look, could you all make sure you're muted? I felt like that was an option that I chose, but if we could just make sure everyone's muted, and we'll try to figure out what this background noise is. Okay, so I'm going to move on here. Let's see. I want to thank the Iowa NRCS for taking the time to pull together this webinar with us, to create the PowerPoint that you'll be seeing today, and just taking the time to further present information about this OMS and answer some questions and just really help flesh through this new interim standard. So today we have with us is Kevin Kuhn, who's the resource conservationist at the Iowa State Office, as well as Jessica Downey, who's the Iowa Equip Coordinator at the state office. So they will be leading the webinar for us today. And then Erica and I will be taking notes and kind of popping in and trying to answer some of your questions or address your comments as we are going throughout the presentation. So I just want to make sure we're ready to go. I will try to figure out the chat situation. Darn it, you guys, I'm so sorry. Okay, so Kevin, let's see. Okay, I'm going to try to work on the background, guys, after Kevin gets started. So I'm not exactly sure. And I'll look at the chat too. I'm seeing a bunch of chat come in, so I'm not exactly sure why it seems to be disabled for others and not why you're getting that. So at the very least, if you want to email me at roz@iowaorganic.org, I'll be keeping an eye on that, and I can grab your questions that way if you feel it's not coming through on the chat. Okay, Kevin, take it away.
Well, thanks, Roz, and we really appreciate you putting this webinar together to talk about this new organic management standard and some of the funding opportunities that we're going to have for the organic producers in Iowa. So go ahead and hit the next one on there, Jessica. Yeah, that looks good. So this is a new standard for Iowa NRCS. It's a new standard nationally. And so it was developed, and then each state had an opportunity to go ahead and adopt that at the state level. And then we were able then to make changes as we saw necessary to kind of make it the best program for the state of Iowa. So we took the interim standard and we made changes, and then we adopted that in February of this year. So, and it is an interim, so we'll be kind of working with this standard for the next 3 years, and then with the potential of it becoming a regular conservation practice standard. Next. Go ahead, Jessica. So when we think about our organic management standard, you guys can take a look at this and the documents. And what you do is you Google NRCS. So you can either Google Iowa NRCS or even just NRCS, and you might get to the national page. But then your next click is going to be the Field Office Technical Guide. And then the next click, once you're in that, and if you go to the national, it'll make you pick Iowa. And then you look at section 4. And then click on the conservation practice standards. And then all of our practice standards in Iowa are listed there in alphabetical order, and you'll see the organic management standard. And so once you get to that, then we'll have different documents that are attached to this standard. So we have the actual standard write-up, and then we have the implementation requirements that go with that standard. And then nationally, they are working on a tech note that's going to help provide more guidance to the standard, and that will be listed there. But if you were to just look at one piece right now, probably the most clearest document will be the implementation requirements that talk about everything that's required in the standard. Next. So the first thing I want to hit on here is the general requirements for this standard. So the first one being, we must adhere to the USDA's National Organic Program standards. So this is a big one. And so as a producer, if you're in this standard and you're in the transition, you must self-certify that those NOP standards are being met. Because we came to our understanding that the organic certifier and the inspector, they may not come into the picture until year 3 of that transition. So you'll self-certify until that certifier says you are now an organic, that ground is organically certified. The crop rotations must include 3 of the 4 main crop types. So warm season grass, warm season broadleaf, cool season grass, cool season broadleaf. So we have to have 3 of those 4. Now, a cover crop can count for one of the crops. So we can be as simplified as a corn bean rotation with a cover crop, and we can meet our 823 standard. But it's important for you guys to realize that your organic certifier may have more stringent rules on that rotation. Thirdly, must maintain or establish 1 perennial conservation buffer. And that's probably a fairly low bar. I know as organic producers, you have buffers often in place. And so when we put one of those in place, then we're going to be looking at our seeding standards. Fourthly, the cropland must be to the tolerable soil loss level. Okay, this one's kind of a big one. So as organic, to be certified as organic, they have language in there that you're maintaining soil health, soil quality. Well, when we look at this, we actually run soil loss, our calculator, and Russell 2, and we take into account everything, every trip across your field, and then that gives us a predicted soil loss. And then each soil type has a tolerable soil loss level. Now, in the state of Iowa, most of them are going to be 5 tons. So we need to have your operation at 5 tons or less to meet the requirements of this organic management standard. So if we're on our A and B slopes, so kind of the slopes of 5% or less, that shouldn't be too hard. It becomes more challenging when we get into our C slope ground, the 5 to 9% slopes. And that's when it's more challenging. And once we get into the D slopes, 9% and steeper, then it becomes pretty difficult. And it becomes even more important that we probably have some long-term perennial crops in there, such as alfalfa hay, to try to be able to get that soil loss to 5 tons or less.
Kevin, a question is, can you define crop? Is forage a crop?
Is forage a crop? Yes. Yes, it is. So, and like alfalfa for, that would be considered a cool seed. I think that would be considered a cool season broadleaf. But yeah. The next big thing, and so, as we look at this standard, you'll notice it is a lot different than our other conservation practice standards. And in some ways, it's a list of a lot of different things that we need to incorporate in to make eligible for the standard. So we must implement a nutrient management standard. And I'll get into some details on a slide coming up when we talk about our nutrient management. And we must also follow NRCS's pest management standard. And I've got a slide there that talks about a few things. And if we're a livestock producer, a cow calf or a grazing operation of any sort, then we have to have a prescribed grazing plan that meets our 528 standard. And when we deal with pastures, they need to be managed so that we're getting 30% of our dry matter intake considered in that growing season. So these are the big, quite a list of the pillars that we need as we're working with you to get you to meet this 823 standard. So it's, there's quite a bit there. Go ahead, Jessica. So we'll talk a little bit about the nutrient management part of this. In our standard, I'll just hit some of the key components. It requires soil testing. So when we're dealing with a new system, we're usually looking at a soil test that's 2 years or less, but it needs to be at least on a 4-year cycle. And we're testing for pK, pH, and so that's a critical piece. The next critical piece is we're looking at the P and the phosphorus and potassium that are applied, and we're applying those on our optimum soil test categories and below. But we do have, when we deal with manure, we are allowed then to be able to put on that phosphorus on high and very high testing soils. But we need to run the P index, and that is an assessment tool that we utilize to determine the off-site risk of losing that phosphorus. So a lot of that that P index, it looks at a lot of different factors. But one of them is the particulate P. And that particulate P, that gets into our offsite, into our aquatic systems with soil. So soil erosion plays a big role in the P index. It does look at soluble P also. And so when we run that tool, then, if we're at a very low or low assessment, you're allowed then to put on not more nitrogen than Iowa State requirements or recommendations, but you can put on additional phosphorus beyond the agronomic rates. But once we hit the medium assessment level, then we can only use a maintenance rate of phosphorus. And if we get into the high or very high assessment levels, then we're not able to put that manure down without making changes. So when we look at the nitrogen part of meeting our standard, we use a corn nitrogen calculator and that maximum ratio. And this is, I should step back. When we think about our 590 standard, we're basing this off Iowa State's recommendations. And we're basing it off Iowa State law. And then we look at the national standard that we take to adopt into Iowa. So what I'm talking about, these main bullets, these are Iowa State's guidelines. So we look at nitrogen, we use a corn nitrogen calculator, and that is based off of a ratio of the cost of nitrogen versus for corn, what the bushels price is. So we can enter your cost and we can enter what we feel like you're going to get for the corn, and but we cannot exceed a 0.5 ratio. So if we're using a 0.5 ratio and you're corn following soybeans, for the majority of Iowa, that maximum nitrogen rate's 182 pounds. But Southeast Iowa, it's 201. And so inside of our nutrient management standard, we're going to give the recommendations for small grain and for crops following, or for corn, for, corn following a small grain. And then another big thing for our nutrient management standard is the sensitive areas are identified. And this is really based on the Iowa State law. And so once we'll identify those sensitive areas when we're doing a nutrient management plan with you. And then we need to have 50-foot vegetative buffers in place, or that manure needs to be injected or incorporated. So that is some of the key components that go into that nutrient management plan that we would develop with you.
Kevin, I have a couple questions I'm going to pop in right here. One is, what is a sensitive area? Please define. And then I have kind of a lengthy question, so give me a second to read that one after you answer this.
Okay. So a sensitive area would be, ponds, lakes, intermittent streams would be the big ones. The intermittent streams, that would be the key ones.
Okay. This question, the OTI National Bulletin does not show 528 as an available practice to contract. The bulletin just shows these practices. Do we follow the bulletin practice list? So they list conservation, and you can see this in the chat too. Conservation plan supporting organic transition, practice code 138, organic management practice 823, transition to organic design, practice code 140, conservation cover, practice code 327. They're in the chat. Kevin, do you want to pop those up, or if you can just address in general?
Actually, Rob, let me get to that on another slide.
Got it. Okay.
And so what's critical for everyone to understand is right now we're talking about the organic management standard and what's required in that standard. And then we'll visit then about the funding sources and then what's available in those funding sources. Go ahead, Jessica. Just in a continuation of the nutrient management part of our standard. So when you go into that field office technical guide, you can pull up nutrient management, and we'll have a guidance document listed there. So for those that want to dig into how we, all the recommendations go into that nutrient management plan, you can go ahead and look at our guidance document. And it gets into all the details of what's required. And we broke that down into 5 sections. So first section, we're going to talk about soil testing, and then the phosphorus and potassium recommendations, and pH and liming recommendations based on that. In section 2, we just talked nitrogen. Section 3, the sensitive areas. So that's a 2-page document that you can look at. We had a question on that. And then section 4 is when we utilize manure. And then our section 5 is when we get into implementing our hayland planting, seeding, and prescribed grazing. So what went into this document is 25 plus different publications, state law, and we tried to bring into the document what our planners and what our producers need to understand most of the time. But it does list the go-to document wherever you're at, so that our planners and or producer can go into that specific publication and get more information. Okay. So another key that was listed to meet in our organic management standards, pest management 595 standard. And so I think when we look at that, this is like the big key for organic producers, weed control. And so, we're going to be asking a lot of questions about your system. And one of the biggest requirements under it for an organic producer is the crop scouting and taking notes on those crop scouting throughout the season. But this is a place where our conservation planners that are out there, we have some with that have some organic backgrounds and expertise, but we'll have a lot of folks that are going to be pretty new. So they're going to learn so much from working with you folks as we develop these plans. And that'll grow our agency, and that will be just that much smarter as we move to the next organic producers. Okay, Jessica. So when you look at that standard, I went through the general requirements. So any standard that they have the general requirements, and those are minimum standards that have to be followed to implement it. But we can get into the additional requirements, and that's going to be based on some of your objectives and goals. They might pull some of them out when we're ranking applications. So it's important to know if you, as you're working to develop this plan, if some of your purposes get you into the additional, or you want to do some of the additional, that's great. Just know we need to be clearly communicated what's required. So there are additional stuff. And I on the next slide, I show a couple examples here. Okay, I thought we had a little different, but anyway, here we go. Thank you. Anyway, so this is what that implementation requirements IR looks like, and you can see on there where we get additional requirements. So let's say we got into soil health. So there's more things that the bar is a little higher that we get into, and one of them would be if we're using our organic nitrogen sources. They cannot comprise more than 50% of that nitrogen need. And the idea is like we deal with poultry manure, organic, it's an organic in source. So that only 50% of that may be available for that crop season. So what happens is if we rely solely on the poultry, then our phosphorus loading can get pretty excessive. So what this is saying is we got to keep that at 50% less, and we need to rely on legumes in the rotation, trying to get some that additional nitrogen that way. And we could go down to another one where it says enhance habitat for wildlife, pollinators. And there we talk about having 5% of that, of the organic farm into some wildlife habitat, like prairie, and that 50% needs to be native species. So I just bring those up as examples to when we move into those purposes, that there can be some additional stuff that's required. Okay. So that is kind of our overview of the organic management standard. And so now we'll talk just a little bit on the funding sources that for us to implement that standard. So under our Environmental Quality Incentive Program, EQIP, then we have this Organic Transition Initiative. And so under this funding source, it can only be used for transition acres. So you could be an organic producer with 500 acres, and you've got 40 acres that now you've expanded your operation, and you're now transitioning that into organic. So that's what's eligible. Or you could be a new producer just now starting that process of becoming organic. And for this initiative funding, the application that you need to go into the field office and sign an application, an EQIP application. And that deadline for that is coming up. It's June 15th. So that's the first step for you guys. If you're interested, is to get that application signed. And then those applications are ranked, and contract obligation will happen September 15th, this fall. So with that said, this organic management standard is now listed with all of our other practice standards. So we can also fund this under our normal EQIP funding process. And that gets in what we call the classic. But so for those of you're an existing organic producer and you're not transitioning any land, your operation, if you're interested in doing this standard, you can go in and sign an application. And then we don't have any of the dates, but then this fall, with that, we would sign you up and rank it and then determine if funding is available. Go ahead, Jessica. So, and either way, this is kind of the process that we ask you to go through. So the first step, signing that EQIP application at the field office. And like I said, June 15th being for this organic transition initiative, being that deadline. But you can also go in and sign a regular EQIP application for this fall. And once that happens, then you'll meet with the conservation planner, and they'll go through the 823 standard and any questions you have. They'll talk to you and ask about your objectives of your farm, any problems you're having, any resource concerns. And then they're going to visit with you about your complete cropping system, your crop rotations, your nutrient system program, your tillage systems, your weed control program, the buffer areas that you have in place. They're going to visit with you about your livestock operation that's involved. and just any of the issues that you have with natural resource concerns. Then they can look at any other needs that you have, such as, is there waterways, and are you having waterway issues? Do you want a windbreak, filter strip, hoop buildings, native plantings, watering facilities, all of these things. That planner is going to work with you, and some of that will fall under the 823 standard, but some of that will be other conservation practice standards that we can work with you on. So once that interview process has gone through, then that conservation planner will walk your farm. And then that planner will bring ideas back to you, and together you will work to help develop a conservation plan for your farm. So once we have that plan, then we can rank that application. And then if the application is funded, a contract will be developed. Next. And so one of the big things, I'm sure that the interest is there, is, what dollars are available when we think about the 823 organic management standard. So in the world of cost share through EQIP, we look at scenarios, and so the planner working with the state office has to decide what scenario matches up to your farm that determines what that incentive rate will be per acre. So payment rates that we're given range from $210 an acre to $1,800 and close to $20 an acre. So that's a lot of spread in the cost or the incentive amount. So we determine what that scenario is going to be. It's based on your size of the farming operation. It's based on what crops you're growing. Are they considered simple commodities? If they are, that'd be like corn, wheat, small grain, soybeans, hay. Or are they considered the complex commodities, such as vegetables, melons, potatoes, sweet potatoes, nuts, berries, etc.? And then we look at, is livestock part of that operation? And then there's a foregone income that can be part of that price scenario. And so we don't have the guidance, the rules that are going to be attached to how we're going to exactly decide this yet. So that's still coming. But what I will say with some confidence, if you're an operation that is 5 acres or less, then you're going to be more close to that $1,820 an acre. But if your operation for transition, your operation is 40 acres or more, you're going to be closer to that 210. And that is about all I can say on the incentive amounts today. And it is a new standard and it's new funding source. So they are still working on this and getting things out to us. Okay, Jessica.
Kevin, we had a quick question. Can you repeat who qualifies for the 1,800 more so? Is that less than 5 acres?
Yeah, so I can't specifically say who qualifies, but what I was saying was that if your organic farming operation is 5 acres or less, that's when we're going to be at the high end of that incentive payment. So I think what they're thinking, produce, vegetables, we can certainly raise a lot on those kind of acres. And so that is a higher incentive. But once we get into an operation of, let's say, 40 acres or more, then we're going to be on the lower end of that payment. Now, I guess you guys, it's up to you to decide whether, 210 if you're on the lower end, whether it's worth, working with us and the different requirements that we ask that have to be met. So hopefully that helps. I just can't get any clearer than that because of what they're still working on it. And we just don't have any further guidelines on it. But when you guys go in and you're working with that planner, before that contract signed, you are going to know what scenario you're falling under. You're going to know what that incentive payment is.
Regarding the same question, Kevin, what about 13 acres? Can he say more for small size, not less than 5?
So that's where all the
Okay.
details will be at, and I just can't.
And then
whatever I said would be wrong.
Okay. Who is the conservation planner in the local offices titled? Is it the district conservationist? Is it the soil conservationist? Can you clarify that?
Yeah, so it's both. It's both. And we have technicians to do conservation planning also. And so know that, some of our field offices, even as an agency, we have some folks with some experience with organic producers, but the majority of them may not have that experience. And so we'll be working with those planners, so that everything works smoothly. But our planners are going to be learning a lot from you guys. I mean, when we're planning with any producer, we always learn from every producer. But there's going to be parts of this that we're going to be learning a lot from you guys. We look at the contracts. We can do them 3 to 5 years is what we, for an EQIP contract. And like we stated before, the Organic Transition Initiative is only for transitional acres, but this standard can be used on what's certified acres today, but not until fall. And we don't have any of the specifics of the dollars amounts available and the rankings, etc.
Kevin, I have a couple more follow-ups for you.
Okay.
Do we have any concern about the payment scenarios before we have a handle on how we're going to prepare these plans? I fear folks are going to see dollar signs and lose sight of the underlying objectives. For context, I am part of the team rolling this standard out in Wisconsin.
Yeah. So, it's going to be come into that when we talked about that process and developing that conservation plan. And it's really critical that the plan, that we know the requirements and that we have the nutrient management plan. We go through the pest management standard. We've run through your system to know where you sit with soil loss. We need to know the sensitive areas on the farm. We need to know where your buffers that you have today or where you plan to implement them. So this is truly conservation planning, that we're looking at a lot of factors. So it's going to be really important that we inventory, we get your objectives, we figure out everything that it's going to take to meet this standard, and that is communicated to you folks really well so that you know what you're getting into. And I know that there's going to be some of us that are really going to have to be supportive to our conservation planners so that we help them in this process. And so we'll have to come up with a strategy. Once we know how many applications that we have by the June 15th deadline, and we know where they're at, then we'll pull those field offices and we'll do some further trainings with those. And we're come up with some strategies to make sure that we're providing a service that we need to for the organic producers that are signed up.
Okay, I have a few more follow-ups to this particularly. Okay. So one person we've been talking to, her planner has no experience. And I've signed up. How does my NRCS planner get his data that can help, that how can you help?
Yeah. So that's going to get back to us just doing a good job supporting that planner. And so if they don't have experience, they will gain experience through the process, but we have to have some folks that are with them through that process. We want you guys to be successful. And, we're interested in solving resource concerns. And so for this to be a win-win for everybody, we have to do a good job of planning and communication.
Here's another question. What if we are transitioning with a perennial crop that will be growing grain for 3 years? It will not include 3 of the 4 main crops because it does not need to be planted again.
Yeah, so I think that's what we'll look at the system, where you're coming from, and then what the planned rotation is. So if we have some hay down, a perennial crop, that makes sense in the transition period. And then are you going to corn, or what's that look like afterwards? I hadn't really thought about it, but obviously we like perennial crops and organic, because that gives us that nitrogen when we're going to a nitrogen needed crop like corn, and obviously reduce our soil loss. So when we do that and we have the length of the contract, I don't think we'll have an issue meeting that demand. But we'll have to, if we get into certain things, we'll have to take a look at it.
Okay. A couple more follow-ups for you. Hi, thanks, Kevin. Have you had any applicants for the 823 funds yet? How did the process go for them? Seems like most producers, me included, would need a lot of help determining if they could qualify ahead of applying. For example, the Russell calculations.
So we want you to go in, if you're interested at all, just go in and sign the application.
Okay.
So then we'll jump in and we'll start that planning process to know where you sit with soil loss, and going through your operation to know where additional things would need to be done to meet this standard. And I do not know at this time how many applications we have in Iowa yet.
And I would just follow up and say, I know that we have some farmers that have been working with their NRCS offices, whether they've actually submitted that application, it's went through all that process, but they are working with their county offices right now. And I know that we heard some of the questions that were coming up at the county level today on this webinar. So I know folks are going in and they're starting to do this process at the county level. But again, exact numbers yet without the deadline, I think that might be hard to tell. For group info, I went into my local NRCS office yesterday and they said they are doing a training today also on this program, but first response was not much of an idea of what this is yet. And like Kevin would say, I'm not surprised of hearing that. We're all kind of in this together, trying to help each other out in this interim initial round.
Yeah, we did one informational training a while back with our planners. It's probably been 6 weeks ago now. And so we will do additional trainings for sure. But just ask that people have some patience, as it is a completely new standard, and a new funding source. So new standard, new funding source, and some of our planners will be inexperienced in working with organic producers.
And I would encourage folks to reach out to Iowa, me, myself, or Erica, and we're here to help find answers to your questions as well. So if you want further advice, we can help connect you to some different folks as well. So know that we are also a resource. Someone mentions, I'm sorry I got on late, is the application the conservation program application? Should I add 823 to my 138 and 140?
Jessica, do you want to jump on with that and answer that question?
I sure can. Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Downey. So you want to go ahead and put your application in. It is a conservation application we've used before for EQIP or CSP or any of other programs. And we kind of refer to it as a 1200 in our local field offices. And that's what you're going to fill out. You can put on there is a spot on our new application form, what you're interested in. And so you could write in there the type of practices or activities that you would be interested in doing with your organic transition. And then that would be a good starting point and conversation with your planner at your local field office.
So Jessica, once they sign that application, regardless of what they put on there for their interest, they're kind of open to all our conservation practice standards, right?
Correct. Yep. You can put
Yep.
things on there. It will not limit you to just what you write on there. Absolutely.
Okay.
Just a starting point.
And then someone asks, does Iowa pay on 140?
I need to go to the next slide. The 140 is our TSP. Yes, 140, Transition Organic Design.
And the answer would be yes.
Okay, thank you. I just want to also point out that OCI Chapter 1 in Iowa, they have 100 farmer members, and their board is committed to helping other farmers transition to organic, and they would like to collaborate with NRCS on this program. So I want you to know that they're interested and available, and we can help with that as well. And if you want me to connect you with this person offline, I can do that as well, Kevin.
Okay. So this slide, some of the other focused conservation practices that we're going to be utilizing a lot with the transition acres. And so that's where we get our technical service program, our technical service providers that can work with folks in the transition with our conservation practice CPA 138 and our transition organic design. But what the qualifier is, we just don't have many technical service providers certified to provide this service in Iowa today. So what if you were to go that way, they are going to help pull this conservation plan together, that all the components we talked about for the 823 management practice, that they can help pull that together. Other practices we can get involved in: conservation cover, whether we're putting in some buffer areas, conservation crop rotation. And so there can be additional incentives on top of the other dollar amounts I was showing you. Now, we have to be making improvements. So in a cover crop rotation, there has to be the additional adding, like a perennial cover like hay or small grain. So we are demonstrating improvement. Cover crops, another practice, field borders, and nutrient management. So these look to be available. We believe these will be available under the Organic Transition Initiative funding, but some of this stuff is still being ironed out. And go ahead, Jessica, to the next slide. So when we're working with you folks, you know, we have like 140 conservation practice standards in our field office technical guide. So we want to work with you on your transition acres for this. We want to work with you on your other lands. And so as you guys have concerns or things that you'd like to implement, you know, we can look at a lot of different things, like filter strips here could be CRP. We have a hoop building. We have a windbreak. We have grass waterway. We have a farm pond there that might be needed for a watering source for cattle operation. So we have a lot of different things available that we will, when we put that plan together based on your objectives, your concerns, that we can utilize. But what I can't specifically say today is, under the funding sources like Organic Transition Initiative, they're still working on the details of what we might be able to get funded through that funding pool. But For those practices that we can't fund through that funding pool, we can sign an additional EQIP application and go under our normal EQIP. Or we have other resources available to us. The state of Idaho, the Division of Soil Conservation, other ways that we might be able to utilize funds to help you implement other practices. And I think, go ahead, Jessica. I think that might have been.
Kevin, can you speak to the alignment between the conservation plans that result from 823 and 138 and the OSP the producer must prepare for their certifier?
So the organic plan that goes to the certifier, because as part of the requirements for the this organic management standard, you must follow the National Organic Program requirements. We are not playing that role. So what I'm trying to say, you know, there's a system in place with organic certifier, inspectors that are you as producers go to for the NOP standards and requirements. So this management practice standard is kind of an addition to following those NOP. When we get into the technical service providers and like the CPA 138, that plan they develop doesn't equal the plan that's required for the organic certifier. It can, but you as an organic producer have to work that out with the technical service provider. But our requirements for that 138 are kind of in addition to some of the things that are required from the National Organic Program.
And just to wrap back couple comments back in terms of the information we have available now, will the NRCS be providing practice standard 823 updates publicly or specifically to TSPs?
To update 823 updates to who? Say it again.
To the general public, like kind of today, or just specifically to TSPs, people that are technical service providers?
No, as if there's changes made to the standard, you know, we'll want to get that word out to, you know, everyone. You know, there won't be any changes to our Iowa standard through this first go around, but there could be, you know, down the road, and then there's an interim standard. And so if you go to the Field Office Technical Guide, you should always have the most current version. But there's no foreseen changes going to happen in our Iowa 823 standard as we get through these first rounds.
An anecdotal question. I'll be advertising 2 small parcels on my farm for beginning organic farmers. Can I apply for the 823 now without a tenant in place? They're working with PFI.
Yeah, so I mean, if there's not a tenant in place, then the owner of the land that's, you know, going to rent that out for an organic producer would have to be considered the tenant, the producer at that time, because most of what's required in this organic management standard is management practices. So that producer needs to be actively engaged to be able to know what the system is planned to be and what's going to happen and what they're agreeing to. So it, you know, based on what you stated, I think it'd be better to have that. You could sign an application, but it would be better to have that producer, that organic producer that's going to rent the land involved before any other steps were taken.
Thank you, Kevin. And I had a outside question on that. So just to clarify, someone that is renting land and is the producer, they would qualify to apply for this, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
What's the next deadline after mid-June deadline? Since they don't have a tenant.
So you could sign an application and let's say you got a tenant in the next month or something. But otherwise, Jessica, when we look at, let's say we're coming into fall, we're looking at fiscal year 2024 equip dollars. Or we could be looking at the next time that the Organic Transition Initiative is going to fund for 2024. So, because there's going to, potentially there's, additional dollars that will come. But we do not at this time know when those deadlines will be that we're going to take those existing applications and now look at them and rank them for potential contracts. So the best thing I can tell you is go ahead and sign an application when you can, and they'll have that on file.
I think so any other questions? Right now, it looks like we're caught up. So if you guys have any follow-up or any last minute questions that you might have for Kevin or Jessica, get them in now. We are close to wrapping up.
We do look at NRCS in Iowa here. We look at it as a great opportunity to be able to work with organic producers in the state that we might not have worked with as much as some of our other producers. And so we just hope to have a little patience, and we'll hopefully have some good conservation plans implemented as a result of this funding.
Kevin, I did have a question. So just to clarify for the certified producers, there isn't a set date set in terms of that deadline. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So you could go in now, and Jessica, you can step in here, but if you go in now and you signed up and you can do that, and then you'll be set for the next fiscal year 2024, which would be this fall.
Yes, I would just like to echo, I think it's very important, even if you're already certified and you're interested in utilizing 823 in your operation, to go ahead and go in and sign an application now. Start that conversation with your local field office, because the planning portion of it can take time. And so allow yourself time without being stressed about a deadline to get through everything and fully look at your operation, dial it down to exactly what you want to do. And so I think it's a good opportunity and idea to go in and right away, instead of waiting until you hear an announcement. Yep.
Stakeless on this one. Will more funds in EQIP be allocated to high tunnels in the future?
Unfortunately, I don't know. I have an answer for that right now. I apologize. It could definitely increase, but I don't know what FY24's funds will look like right now.
Is that funding source? Is that one that gets utilized a lot, or is that a space where money is still being left on the table for the organic funding?
So organic funding that we currently have, we do have funding that's still left on the table. I think this year I had about $26,000 that there was no applications for. So that's in our general classic. It's not the same as this national release organic transition initiative that has separate funds. But in our general classic equip, it's for organic, certified and transition. And I did have funds left over. There were not enough applicants.
I'd like to circle back just to highlight and make sure one of the questions was answered. One of the first questions we had about the OTI National Bulletin, not showing the 528 as an available practice to contract. The bulletin just shows the following processes, and do they follow that bulletin practice list? It looks like that's prescribed grazing.
Yes. So to be clear, if it isn't funded under Organic Transition Initiative, it's still a requirement to have a grazing plan as part of the organic management standard if those acres are being enrolled. So you have an incentive for the organic management standard, and then even then the other practices or even required practices may then also be given an additional incentive through Organic Transition Initiative. And so that's where there needs to be, they're kind of working on what that list is going to look like. And I realized that they did give out a list that said, okay, we're going to fund these practices. But now they're re-looking at that list. So I assume that, the practices that they've talked about funding through it will be, but there may be additional practices that also can be funded through the Organic Transition Initiative funding. So I guess that's probably about the best answer I can give today.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. That was very helpful. And to circle back to another question, with their local NRCS office needing a little more support, do you have any advice on where those local offices can go for additional resources or support?
Well, inside of our agency, the field offices will work with their area office, they'll work with their area resource conservationist, and hopefully I'll be working with some of those folks and to help get this implemented. It is a lot, it's the nutrient management standard alone is got quite a bit to it. We have our grazing experts in the state. So, we've got some people well versed in writing grazing management plans. And when we're just even figuring our soil losses, it's going to be a little different. Different things to look at when we're putting that soil loss together for a producer with the row cultivations and rotary hoeing and different tools that are used that may not be used by some of our other producers.
So this was another question. Is there a good resource to find out how many organic acres there are by county? Is NAS a good resource? I would say, I don't think NAS breaks it down by county. We have state numbers, but I don't know. Do you guys have a better sense of that data?
Yeah, so I think we have data to show the number of organic producers by county.
Yes, producers,
but
not the actual acre number. I'm sorry, I don't think that we would love to have that number. I think I've been asking for it for years. So we piece it together in different ways to have a sense of representation in the county. The USDA's Organic Integrity Database is a really good resource, and you can search that all the way down to county level, city level, production type. There's all these different criteria. So that's sometimes a good resource too to take a look at. There are no grazing TSPs on the qualified list. They're using one from Missouri. I think that's an FYI.
And we do, just so you know, we have some good folks that are pretty good at working with our producers on grazing management plans.
And then someone says, can you go over transition again? OTI is only for producers that have not been certified as organic producers before, or for land that has not been certified organic before?
Okay, good question. It is for the actual specific land that is not today certified as organic. So you can be an organic producer and you're farming 500 acres And you are now going to bring in another 40 acres of land you bought or rented and transition that into organic. So that is available for funding under the Organic Transition Initiative. But when we get into fall, all organic land is eligible to apply for the organic management standard. But we don't know for sure what the rates will be on that, rankings, or, we don't have the details for any of our fiscal year 2024 funding.
And a producer that's in their second year of transition, they are still eligible for those transition acres.
Yes.
Yes. Very good. Okay, we're circling around 1:10. We had allowed time up through 1:15. So I would say if you have any questions, get them in quickly, or I think we might be close to wrapping. So any final thoughts, Jessica or Kevin?
Oh, thanks for hosting the meeting. I'm really glad to be part of it and hopefully getting the word out. So we appreciate very much you guys doing this.
Well, we appreciate you being here. I know we were getting a lot of questions, and so this will be a great resource that we can share out and folks can view it on their own time. But as I mentioned earlier, please reach out to me or Erica. We can help connect you to the information that you're looking for, as well as Kevin and Jessica. I think these all great resources. I will share out the presentation and these PowerPoints as well. So thank you everyone for being on today. I'm so excited to see so many people interested in learning more about this program. So until next time, I hope everybody has a great afternoon.
All right, thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, everybody.